The case of Diane Downs is truly one of the most heinous crimes I've ever heard of, specifically because when you think of a mother and what a mother entails, it is typically full of love, caring, kindness, and compassion. But Diane Downs was the true embodiment of the word evil. So let's get into it. So this is Diane Downs, and she was born on August 7th in 1955 in Phoenix, Arizona. Diane had a pretty normal childhood. Her dad was a postal worker and her mom was a stay-at-home mom. Her dad was a little overbearing and strict, but she really lived the typical life for somebody born in the 50s. So nothing that stood out in terms of like being abused or anything like that as a child. She was in high school when she was 17 years old. She met a man named Stephen and they got together and she went off to college. Diane ended up going to what was called a Bible college. And I don't know if that was like a Christian college, but regardless, it was like a religious institution. And she was actually expelled for being promiscuous. And what that entails, I truly don't know. I didn't dig that deep into it. But then she, just got with Stephen and they got married and had children. This was around 1974. And at this point, Stephen and Diane had had 2 children together. But Stephen didn't really want any more children, so he got a vasectomy and said he was done. And this is when Diane took it upon herself to have an affair and get pregnant with a 3rd child that wasn't her husband's. There are a lot of reports over the years that Diane loved being pregnant, but didn't love being a parent because the kids were left alone by themselves a lot of the day. She would literally just leave them at home and not tend to them. So they had 3 kids, 2 being with Stephen and 1 being with another man. And by 1980, they got a divorce. Now, after the divorce, she actually became pregnant a 4th time, but this time as a surrogate, she got paid $10,000 to carry someone else's baby. But she did hand over the baby because it wasn't hers, obviously, and handed it over to the couple that hired her for surrogacy. So just like her father, Diane starts working at the United States Postal Service. This is when she meets a man who is married, but they start a relationship together. Now, the man had made it clear he didn't want anything more than a physical connection, but that did not stop Diane because she was obsessed with him. They were together for however long, and he was saying, hey, I don't want to be a stepfather of your kids. I'm currently married. We're not going to be anything more than physical. And that was Diane's cue to get rid of the children that she already had to be with this man. But like I said, he'd called it off. He was saying, I'm not really into this. Let's just do our own thing. And at this point, she moves to Springfield, Oregon. She kept trying to pursue him, writing him letters, showing up unannounced, visiting him, and he kept saying, yeah, I don't want to do this. And so she took that upon herself to say, well, the only thing to do at this point is to get rid of my children so he will want to be with me. This is when Diane starts planning the unthinkable to get rid of her children. Diane had this friend in a town near Springfield, Oregon, who had a farm. And so she tells her kids, let's get in the car and let's go visit the farm. So they go to visit her friend's farm, but the friend has no idea that they're coming. So the friend was like, well, this is weird that you guys are visiting, but sure, come play with the farm animals. So they spend the day doing this. And then Diane says, okay, it's time to go home. Now, this is like 15 miles outside of the city. So it's kind of like in a rural area, like a wooded area. So they start driving towards home. And all of a sudden, Diane pulls in to this wooded, secluded area and point blank shoots all 3 children. One of her children, who is a girl named Cheryl, actually opens the door to try to get out of the vehicle. And that is when her own mother shoots her in the back to make sure she doesn't get away. And then Diane shoots herself in the arm to make it look like somebody had attacked them. Diane had shot her children point blank range many times. So she keeps them in the car and she drives to the hospital to get them help. Now, if Diane had tried to get these children help, it would have taken 5 to 10 minutes. But reports of eyewitnesses said that she drove so slowly, she actually held up traffic. So what should have taken a few minutes took her about 30 minutes to get to a hospital nearby. So she shows up at a local hospital telling them this grandiose story of this man that she saw on the side of the road who she stopped to help, who all of a sudden just committed this horrible crime. Now, the daughter Cheryl was 7 at the time, and she did not make it, unfortunately, but the other 2 were still clinging on for dear life. And Diane actually told the doctors that if the daughter, the older one, the 8-year-old, had survived and had brain damage, she just wanted her to be let go. She didn't want her to stay alive. And that daughter did suffer a stroke and she wasn't with it mentally. So obviously the hospital staff is like, what is going on? And they bring in investigators. And they notice that when Diane gets in the room with her 2 surviving children, her older daughter visibly is very upset seeing her mother in the hospital room and her heart rate is spiking. And they say that she looks terrified. So they're doing investigation at this point. They're looking at the car and they realize like the blood splatter is not matching up with what had happened. And so they're kind of just letting her talk. And at this point, Diane is talking to the press, doing these interviews saying, oh, this random man just pulled over and shot my children. But the investigators are not believing any of it, and they're just letting her talk as they get their investigation going. At this point, her little boy, her 3-year-old Danny, actually says to them, my mom is the one who did this. And they're like, okay, well, the evidence we have and your child's testimony is enough for us to arrest her. They do end up arresting her, thank goodness, and the 2 children do survive. And she does get a life sentence and she is convicted, which is incredible. And the judge also tacks on an additional 50 years. And the judge does say, my hope is that you never see the light of day. Like, this is ridiculous. You were supposed to protect them and you did everything but. This case is just so incredibly hard because the person that is supposed to be your mother and protect you was the very person that caused them so much pain and trauma. Diane is truly an evil woman who only thought of her own wants and needs and did anything she could to make sure that her children would not get in the way.